Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you're a returning listener, I want to say a big thank you for your continued support. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, welcome. It's great to have you on board. So without further ado, let's get started on today's story. Guys, I just want to apologise ahead of this interview. Some of the audio, you can hear the voice twice in the background, and I tried desperately hard to try and get rid of it, but I couldn't. So I'm just giving you the heads up. I've tried to lower it as much as I can. So yeah, other than that, enjoy this brilliant interview with Patrick. That's it. I just wanted to let you know. Okay, on with the show, as they say. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Ireland Crimes and Mysteries. I'm Nools, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who's lived the kind of career most crime writers can only imagine. Sgt Patrick O'Donnell spent 25 years in one of the largest police departments in the United States, overseeing thousands of investigations ranging from robberies to homicides. He's commanded crime scenes, supervised special units, and brings a lifetime of frontline experience to the world of storytelling. Born in Chicago to two Irish immigrants, Patrick blends his no-nonsense policing background with a deep appreciation of writing, creativity, and even the occasional bit of shenanigans. Now retired, he's the best-selling author behind the Cops and Writers series, host of the hit podcast by the same name, a consultant for screenwriters and novelists, and a featured expert in true crime documentaries. Most recently, he has featured on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, where he discusses his Facebook group, Cops and Writers, which he started 6 years ago and has over 8,000 members and is growing fast. So, whether you're here for the insight, the stories, or just to hear what real police work actually looks like, you're in for a treat. Patrick, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Welcome.
No, the pleasure's mine. I've been looking forward to this ever since we set it up. You have a great podcast. You do a fabulous job, Knowles. Yeah, I'm just honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's so lovely to hear. Well, it goes both ways. You have a great podcast as well. It's very interesting. That's why I wanted to have you on the show. And I see you're wearing your Mayo jersey today.
I am wearing my Mayo jersey. Mom and Dad are both from Mayo. They were born in Culmacraid, right outside of Castlebar. My grandpa is from Feathers.
Oh my God, in County Tipperary. Good county, the premier.
Absolutely.
So you've got a good mix going on.
I do. I have lots of Irish roots.
And come here, you've had such a fascinating journey. I want to ask you about it. You know, your life story, basically. What first drew you to law enforcement and later to writing and podcasting?
I think it started with, watching TV, being a young kid, watching TV shows. I was born in 1964, so I remember, Dragnet, Adam 12, SWAT, TJ Hooker, all the good ones. Hutch, Beretta. I watched all that stuff, and I absolutely loved it. And I was born on the south side of Chicago, which is kind of a rougher part of town. And I remember we moved to a northwest suburb when I was older, but my grandma and grandpa still lived on the south side. And we would spend summer vacations down there with grandma and grandpa. And I was home alone. My grandpa actually broke his leg and he was in hospital. And my grandma and my brother were visiting my grandpa. And the phone rings and I'm like, yeah. And it was my aunt. And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, why wouldn't I be okay? Of course I am. She said, somebody just got killed out in front of the house. And I'm like, what?
Oh my God.
So I was just taking a nap. I heard a loud bang, but it's a very loud, congested neighborhood. The houses are right up against each other. A lot of people in a small, area. So after a while, it just becomes white noise, all the street noise, the buses and the sirens and all that stuff. And I go out there and there's a dead body right on the sidewalk in front and the police are putting up yellow tape. And I'm just like, holy cow, I did not expect that. So, being a kid, I was like, what, 11, 12 years old, maybe. And I'm like, oh, and she said, are you okay? And I said, yeah, the police are handcuffing somebody. So I'm guessing that's the person who did it. And wound up, it was husband and wife.
A
He was
little
accusing
domestic.
her. Yep, he was accusing her of cheating on him, and he grabbed a shotgun and he shot her just as she came off the bus, because Grandma and
Oh
Grandpa's
my
house was
God.
right on the corner by a bus stop. So I was just like, wow. So I saw all the police doing all their police stuff. I had a front row seat, and then later on, our house in the suburbs on the northwest side, uh, it was an evening, and I was probably about 13 years old, and all these police cars pull up in front of our house, and I'm like, Dad, Mom, what are you guys up to? What's going on here? And I thought you were pretty boring, in a good way. And before I know it, there's police officers in full tactical gear with helmets and vests, and there's two police officers in our backyard with a shotgun and an
God.
M16, an automatic
Oh
rifle.
my God.
And
What
there's
were they up
this,
to?
yeah, I know. But they were pointing their guns at our neighbor's house. They were cover.
Okay.
So they were doing a raid on our neighbor's house. They were serving a search warrant. So the door went
Holy hell.
down. They go in with, the big ram and the shield. And as a kid, my eyes were popping out of my head. I'm just like, Mom, look at
You were
this.
seeing it all for real.
Yes. And I was just like, wow. So that really kind of grabbed me. And then when I was in college, a few years down the road, I did an internship with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, and I actually got to ride in squad cars, work in the jail, etc. And I was hooked. I'm like, okay, I got to do this for a living. It's like, this is the greatest stuff ever.
And no regrets, as they say. Huh?
No, not at all.
And come here, when then you went then on a whole, you could say, different trajectory after you retired and you went into books. Like, was there any time in your career basically when you realized this needs to be shared with the rest of the world, so I'm going to write a book?
Not really. The way
there was no aha moment.
Yes, when I first started as a cop, I didn't even think of writing a book. There was no way. That was a thought in my head. It was 1995. The internet was a thing, but not really. And, computers were just kind of kicking off. When I first started, we hand wrote all of our police reports, and we used carbon paper.
Oh my God.
And
that was another whole other job in itself.
Oh yeah. And, police write a lot of reports, but one of the best classes I ever took in high school was typing. There weren't a lot of boys in typing class. It was mostly girls. So okay, cool. I'm surrounded by a bunch of girls. This is a good thing. And I kind of thought I would go to college. And back then, sometimes you would have to pay people to type your term papers for you, to type your papers. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of money. Okay. So I'm like, I'm going to learn how to type. So
very good.
Yeah, that was a natural for me. So that's how I just kind of started that. Yeah, but as far as writing books, that wasn't until the end of my career. And funny enough, the first book that I wrote had nothing to do with law enforcement. I used to sell cars. When I went to college, there was a 6-year lag between the time I graduated to the time I went to the police academy. So I was selling cars. I was a bartender. I worked in restaurants. I did all kinds of jobs. So
you've had a very eclectic life.
Yes, very. So what I did was I wrote a book. Well, I'll back up a little bit. I help people buy cars. It started with friends and family because I did it for 4 years. And over here, people would rather go to the dentist than go buy a car. Or go public speaking. It's a very painful experience. What's it like over in Ireland? I mean, do you negotiate? Do you like barter back and forth?
It depends on your personality, I suppose.
Okay.
Some people it'd be great to barter, but you wouldn't get much leeway now, I have to say, with the dealerships. Like, they look at your old car, they tell you how much they're going to give you for it, and basically,
okay. Yes,
the price kind of usually of the car, that the new car is the price.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, that's a little different over here. And, like, I had people either calling me or they would take me with them, and I'd help them buy the car. And then finally
Okay.
somebody, I forget who it was, is like, you should write a book about how to buy a car without being, ripped off, without, getting taken advantage of. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So I did, and it just kind of just built from there.
Yeah. And that gave you the confidence then, I suppose, to move
Yes.
on to the crime books, I suppose, in a sense.
Well, what happened was, I started going to writer conferences, and people would inevitably come up to me and say, "Hey, you're that cop guy, right?" And I'm like, I don't have a t-shirt on or a sign or anything like that, and they would just ask questions about, hey, would you need a search warrant for this? What would happen if this happened? They were all crime writers, and they were all very nice people. They were just asking, good questions. And somebody who knows a lot more about this stuff than I do said, hey, you know what? You should start writing books, like crime books. And I wrote 2 books specifically for crime writers to get their facts straight. And that's
very
how
good.
that kicked off. Yeah.
Oh, very good. So that should be like a Bible to them.
Yes. Yeah. It's a good reference point. It's called Cops and Writers. One is like From the Academy to the Street, and the other one is Crime Scenes and Investigations.
Very good. Very good. And come here, then your books, they offer a blend of authenticity and great storytelling, might I add. So how do you balance police accuracy with the narrative drama in your books?
Well, the procedural stuff comes naturally. Balance has to do with the reader or the watcher expectations. I've watched a lot of movies and and TV police dramas, and have come to learn there's tropes that people come to expect with these books and movies. There's the lone wolf detective breaking all the rules that would wind up going to jail and getting fired if he did that. And there's no boss usually in these, shows, telling them what to do.
Everything.
Right, they do. And usually there's just that one case they're working on. But the reality is, like, say, a homicide detective, they're juggling multiple cases, especially in a big city.
Yeah, I often wondered that.
Oh yeah, you have to. There's no way around it. An example of, the balance would be, let's say, a vehicle chase, where the police car is chasing the bad guy. And this usually lasts a couple of minutes, sometimes longer, but a police chase is usually a couple of minutes, sometimes not even that.
Okay.
And it's usually followed by a foot chase because the car runs out of gas, or they stop and they bail out or crash or whatever.
Yeah. They take off on foot.
Right. So then there's the foot chase, and hopefully the bad guy gets caught. Now, what you don't see on TV is hours and hours and hours of paperwork and processing. You have 3 minutes of adrenaline and your heart's pumping out of your chest, followed by 6 hours of writing reports. And it's, oh God.
It's like when they do the DNA tests and all that, like CSI and all that. They have it back like within 5 minutes.
Yes. That does not happen at all. So, of course, if I'm writing a book or if I'm writing a screenplay, I'm not going to put in 6 hours of somebody writing a report. So you could take some liberties with that and just kind of fast forward all of that. So that's the way you blend it.
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Well, that makes sense. So it does. Absolutely. And what else did I want to ask you? Yeah. Has your writing changed the way you reflect on your time in law enforcement?
Yes. It brings up all kinds of memories. When you're writing, crime stories and you've lived them, sometimes it sparks another memory. I've got 25 years of them. And there's some that I thought were gone for good, and then they pop up. So I was diagnosed with PTSD when I had about 4 or 5 years on the job. And doing these books and consulting and all this other stuff, it's brought back nightmares like you wouldn't believe. My poor wife and dog, they
seriously.
Yeah, and poor Clark, and my wife,
they're having to deal with the aftermath.
Yes. So if I'm thick into a story that I'm writing, everything comes back, and it's usually at night when I'm sleeping.
Yeah, everything always seems worse in the dark, to be fair.
Oh, It does. It does.
And your Cops and Writers podcast then has become a great resource for people. What inspired you to launch that? And what do you love most about doing the podcast?
When I launched my Cops and Writers books, I was on a lot of podcasts to promote the books. And then I thought to myself, well, I can do this. And, at first, it's like I'm promoting my books. And then all of a sudden it's like, so I started the podcast to promote my books and my brand. And it kind of morphed into something else. It got bigger. And I didn't expect it to. And it became its own.
You least expect.
It is. And it just became its own thing. And I really love it. It's so much fun. And I get to meet people like you. I never would have met you, if it wasn't for podcasts and all that. And other podcasts, from people from all different kind of walks of life. Mostly the people I interview are police officers or some kind of law enforcement. But I've also interviewed victims of crime or, the families, that kind of thing. And I've interviewed celebrities that I would never have had any kind of access to except for the podcast. I interviewed Joe Kenda, Mark Cameron. He wrote the last 5 Tom Clancy novels, and he was a federal marshal. Steve Murphy, Javier Pena. They both were the 2 DEA agents that got Pablo Escobar down in Colombia. Now I'm best friends with Steve Murphy, the guy who got Pablo. We talk about once a week. And that never would have happened. It never would have happened if I didn't have the podcast.
It's amazing the amount of doors it does open for you.
It does.
I mean, you have had guests now from all walks of life, haven't you?
I have.
Any particular episode, I'm presuming now, I'm going to ask you this question. Did any particular episode stay with you and why? But it wouldn't have anything to do with Pablo Escobar now, would it?
No, I mean, it was great. I absolutely loved it. And again, that opened some more doors for me. But this is kind of a Sophie's Choice question. Yeah, I love them all. They're like my children. But
yes, of course, like myself.
Yeah, I've interviewed former KGB agents to CIA spies and, like high profile cops. But the interview that stayed with me and I think touched me most deeply was Dr. BJ Miller from Zen Hospice. I heard him on the Tim Ferriss show, his podcast. I'm a big fan of his podcast. And they did a Netflix special called Endgame about this doctor. Dr. BJ Miller, he is a triple amputee who headed Zen Hospice in San Francisco. Is a very non-traditional, just beautiful way of looking at death, more or less. And cops deal with a lot of death. And he was incredibly inspiring. Like I said before, this guy is a triple amputee and he's a doctor. He rides a bicycle. He's got a motorcycle. And, it is. And he also has one of the most watched TED Talks ever. Millions and millions of downloads. And he's just such a nice guy. And that interview was very raw. It was very emotional. And I received so many emails after that from people who were saying, hey, I recently lost a family member or a friend. And this really helped. And I'm thinking to myself, who am I? I'm just some guy with a computer and a microphone. And it actually helped some people get through a tough point in their lives. So that made me
wonderful to think you're doing that.
Yes, that made it like, okay, this is all worthwhile then.
Yeah, it does. It does make it all worthwhile, doesn't it? Like, when you hear stories like that. And on that note, then, what advice would you give to crime podcasters who want to stay respectful while still telling gripping stories? So it's very important for us to be respectful of the stories we're telling. Have you any advice for them?
That's a brilliant question. We are fascinated with true crime, just as a society. Whenever I would put up yellow tape, it was like moths to a flame. And it didn't matter what time of day or night, people would just come out of the woodwork. And the first questions is somebody dead? Is somebody dead? Is somebody dead? They were like getting excited. And I'm like, wow. But I think as far as advice goes to crime podcasters, just be respectful to the victims and don't glorify the criminals.
Absolutely. I
And,
couldn't agree
I
with you
think
more.
there are some podcasts or TV shows or whatever that really skip over and forget about the victim, no matter who that victim is. And a lot of times in a big city, the victims of, like, say, a homicide are in the middle of some criminality. They're criminals as well. But you have to keep in mind that there's a mom, there's a dad, there's a brother, there's a sister. They could be a father. They could be, whatever. Somebody, this is affecting someone.
Yes, absolutely. Their life is precious to somebody.
To somebody, yes, absolutely. So keep that in mind and, and be respectful that way.
I think Clark agrees with you.
Yes, he did.
Clark is Patrick's dog, by the way.
Yes.
You can hear him giving his opinion in the background. In case you think it's our tummies rumbling or something. Can you walk us through a day in the life, say, of when you were on active duty? I know the listeners would be very interested to hear what that was like. What was like a typical shift really like for you?
Well, one of the great parts of being a police officer was there was nothing typical or the same about every day. You never knew what you were going to get into, which was exciting. It was great. There's nothing typical about it. I was a sergeant for 17 years, so I was a street boss. So whenever the shift started, I would come in early and do roll call, just like you would see on television or in the movies.
Or like in school.
Yes. And it's like all the cops are there. I give them their mail. I assign who's going to be working with who and what area. After a little bit, after I was done with all that, I would go on the street and I had to respond to all dead bodies, fires, homicides, sexual assault, hostage situations, fatal vehicle accidents, and back up the cops on the street. That was my job as a boss. If one of my cops got into, like, say, a squad accident, kicked in a door, used force, like a baton or pepper spray or a taser, I would respond and I would have to investigate it. And I would have to do reports about all that stuff.
Oh my God. So you had a very responsible job, you could say.
I did. And I thought it was the best job in the department. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. And come here, what was the most rewarding part of the job for you? And the hardest, I suppose, then to leave behind?
Yeah, probably the most rewarding was, and it sounds corny maybe, but when you actually made a difference and you feel like you helped somebody.
Well, that's not corny at all.
I think that's, and it could be one of the cops, because you get close with these people. I remember
colleagues, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember one time one of my coppers came in for roll call and he wasn't himself. So, I pulled him off to the side and I'm like, "What's going on?" He said, "I had to put my dog to sleep today, Sarge." I said, "Get out of here." I said, "I don't want you right now." I said, "Your head is not in the game." And I said, "Go home and do what you got to do." But, I've, sick kids, breaking up marriages, all kinds of stuff. You get pulled into the cops' lives as a boss.
Yeah.
And if I can help them.
Human too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was the best part.
Yeah, but absolutely helping. And as you said, it wasn't necessarily just helping out, taking the criminals off the street, helping your actual colleagues as well.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
How did you mentally decompress then after say a tough shift that you'd had? Like, was there something you had to learn the hard way, basically? So there was to decompress when the day was over.
When I was new, it was not uncommon. If it was an especially tough night where, like, say, we're getting shot at or there was an officer got hurt or worse, we would have a choir practice. And a choir practice is code for going to the pub.
He's going to say actual choir practice.
No, we're not singing. There might be singing, later on after a few pints, but but it was not uncommon to do that. But as I got a little more time on, and what, I learned you can't find your answers to problems at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. It's not going to happen. It just makes things worse. So absolutely. I was a gym rat. I love going to the gym. I still do every day. In working out And exercising is, I think, just for me, probably one of the best medicines there is for stress and dealing with the stuff we had to deal with.
Yeah. And you'd go after a shift then if you had a hard day, or you just go anyway after a shift, would you?
I would just go anyways, but sometimes you had an extra hard workout if it was, a tough day. And I love riding motorcycles. Going on a long ride in the city, and not the city, excuse me, in the country, and it's just you and the bike and nature. Oh, it's awesome. I absolutely love it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Food for the soul.
Yes.
And come here, what role did teamwork play in your time then as an officer, say? And how does that now compare to, say, your solo work that you're doing now as a writer? I know you're not really solo when you're podcasting, you're talking to people and what have you. But say from the writing aspect,
well,
that is solo.
When I was a cop, teamwork was everything. Nothing gets done on a police department with one person. It's a team effort. We'll go to, like, say, a homicide. You see a bunch of people, the yellow tape, and everyone's milling about. Everybody has a job to do, and if they don't do their job correctly, it hurts the entire investigation. So we all have one common goal, and that's, to get the bad guy or gal, whoever did the naughty stuff, that's the goal. And like I said before, it's a team effort. So teamwork is everything to me, and I relied on it. And, again, if I'm in one of the worst neighborhoods in the country, I'm relying on the cop that's sitting next to me in the squad car, as we're approaching live gunfire. It's like, I can't think of anything else except maybe the military that you have that kind of teamwork. And then going to becoming a writer, it can be very lonely if you let it. I suggest you make friends in your communities, go to conferences, libraries, smaller independent bookstores. They have groups and Facebook groups like mine or any other Facebook group. There's a bunch of them out there for writers. Get involved.
Build your own team.
Yes, absolutely. If you don't find one, build your own. That's what I did. Yeah. And and they're probably going through some of the same stuff you are, some of the same problems and challenges that you are.
Absolutely. Everybody has one, as they say, haven't they?
Yep.
There's one big difference now, I have to say, when we're talking about, police work and all that. One big difference here in Ireland, I suppose, is that most of our Gardaí don't carry firearms, right? So from your perspective, how does that change the dynamics between, say, the police and the public? So you carry them over there, we don't.
Right. But I think that, I know in the UK they have like armed response units. I think the Gardaí has that as same.
Yeah, but they wouldn't be in every town. I'd say, like, if you're in a smaller country place, you'd have to wait for them to arrive.
You probably would, yes. But, when I was a kid, again, growing up in Chicago, I would have thought it's strange if they didn't have a gun. Like a carpenter or a mechanic not having tools. The way I looked at the pistol on my hip was it was a tool. If you're in uniform, it was expected that you have a gun on your hip, just like they expect you to have a badge and a nameplate. That's just, I don't know, that just was normal for me.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's often debates over here, should they be armed, that it's getting more dangerous and all that. And there's a lot of for and a lot of against it,
Oh, sure.
That there's more likely to be somebody hurt if there's a firearm involved.
You have to be responsible, and there has to be a lot of good training regarding it.
Yeah.
With that firearm comes a ton of responsibility. I remember when I was in the police academy and an older instructor is like, just so you guys know, every call you go to now is a man with a gun. Even if you're going to a barking dog or whatever, the man with a gun is going to be you. So keep that in the back of your head.
Yeah.
It's always there.
At all times.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Listen, in your experience then, are there things American policing could learn, say, from the Irish approach or vice versa?
Well,
is there anything we could learn from each other?
Oh, we always can learn from each other. That's the way I see things. I love the Irish way of community. I think that's a good thing. And I feel like most people in, say, a small Irish town know who the Gardaí are. If I might be mistaken, but I think they know who the guard is. And that can be good or bad for, the police officer, because if they live there, then they're going to have people coming up to them, all the time, probably about complaining about their neighbor or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's also good that the people in your community, who the criminals are, who the good people are, that kind of thing. Over here in America, fortunately, the volume of our 911 calls, or it's 999 over by you, right?
Yeah, 999, yeah.
Yeah, it's 911 over here. But it's the use of a lot of beat cops. I loved my beat cops. We had, a couple, but when you go from assignment to assignment to assignment, it's hard to justify having a police officer just, walking around talking to people.
Right.
That's
so they're in their patrol cars all the time, isn't it?
Yes. So
Okay.
I did have, especially on day shift, I would have bicycle police officers and cops that would just walk a beat. And I tell you what, I love the beat cops. If you have a good beat cop, they're fantastic. They do a great job. And there's nothing better to foster, like community relations than a beat cop walking around a quote unquote bad neighborhood. And for some of especially the kids, they're not used to, they could sit down and talk with this police officer. They could, not be scared of that police officer. It's not a scary thing. It's not, whatever. They're there to help you, and I had friends that were on the department that grew up in the worst neighborhoods you can imagine. And they said their best friends were the beat cops. Those were the...
I think it's becoming more like that now over here, Patrick. You see less. I remember when I was younger, you'd always see the guards walking up and down the street, but it's becoming less and less now. There's not that many of them around the streets anymore.
That's unfortunate.
So I'd say, yeah, it is. It is. And I wouldn't know my local guard now. I wouldn't know who my local guard is anymore. Whereas before you would have known all their names going back 10, 20 years, But
I think there's a value to that. Yes.
Yeah.
And I tell you one thing, Irish cops, I know, are great communicators. They can talk. Irish people are good at talking. And we could learn from that over here. Some of the cops that I had to supervise, I wish were good talkers, and they weren't. It was like, maybe I should send you to Ireland for a week and you can go learn how to talk to people.
Kiss the Blarney Stone or something, and then they'd come back and they'd be grand again. Then
there we go.
They'd be able to talk a cat out of a tree or something.
Oh my.
Come here, given your background then, do you feel a connection to how Irish crimes are investigated or portrayed? Are you ever tempted, say, to write an Irish-based case in one of your books?
Yeah,
Are you tempted to put it, base it in Ireland?
Right. Things are done differently, between the way we do things, the way, the Irish police do things. And you don't have the volume of violent crime like we do here in America. No. So, but my latest book, I have melded some Irish stuff. My latest book.
Go on, tell us what you've done. Oh, the good collar.
Yeah.
Do I sense a priest in there somewhere?
Yes. But the latest book there, The Good Collar, my main character is Michael Quinn. So he's mom and dad are from Ireland. Yeah, and he's got a sassy Irish mom that's 4'10" and 100 pounds, and he's scared to death of her. Just like my mom is 4'10".
Like most of us with our mothers.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. It's like my wife is like, "You're still scared of your mother, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yep, absolutely. I'm scared that she's 86 years old, and I know she can kick my butt. It's in my head. I that's never gonna leave me." And
that's an Irish mammy for you.
Yes, exactly. And I'm scared. So that's my main character. He's this big tough cop, but he's scared of his little Irish mother. And his sister is a nun, so he has a sister that's a sister. So I thought that was a
very Irish family.
Yes.
Very Irish family.
Of course, and he was in a seminary when he was in high school. His mom wanted to be a priest, but he liked girls, and that wasn't mixing so great. And his father died when he was in high school. His father owned a butcher shop. He had to quit the seminary he was going to anyways and help out mom with the butcher shop.
Right. So he learned other skills in the butcher shop.
with knives. That's right. That will come into play later.
Don't give too much away now. We want people to read your book.
I won't. But it's yes. So yes, I do blend the Irishness in me because that's who I am. It's like you write what you know, and that's how I was raised.
Well, you grew up with Irish parents, it doesn't matter what country you're in. If you've got Irish parents, you've got Irish parents. So you have.
Absolutely.
So listen, come here and I ask you now. I have a couple of more questions I want to ask you. What role do you think podcasts and books like ours, say, play in shaping public understanding of justice and criminality? Do you think it makes any difference when they're reading, say, your brilliant books or listening to our podcasts? Or
I think it's vital. Like I stated before, hopefully not sensationalizing criminality, but focusing on victims. I also hope that someone who has listened to one of our shows was not a victim of a crime because they remembered something that they could do to stay out of harm's way. You're talking, you bring up our podcasts are different in format for the most part, but we do have a common theme of it's like, okay, this happened to this victim. They were in this situation. And I'm hoping that somebody out there that's listening to that is like, that was really dumb of me. I was doing that last night. Or a week ago, I was doing that. Or my kid that's in university, she might be walking the streets at whatever time with her friends. And then she gets separated. And that's how bad stuff happens. You can't be paranoid.
Make you more aware.
Yes, but situational awareness and just being smart about it, and take the phone out of your hand when you're in public. Put your head up and look around you. Oh my God.
That's the new problem, isn't it? That's the modern problem.
I'm seeing people walking into cars, like in parking lots and stuff. I know. Not alone some bad guy that's stalking you. It's like, know what's going on around you, for God's sake.
Absolutely. You'd have to surgically remove them.
Right. Maybe a little more on my side, educating people as far as the realism of being a police officer and police work. I think that's, again, that education aspect is really good because you never know. You might wind up serving in a jury. You might wind up, doing something like that. And people actually believe what they hear on a podcast or see on TV as they think everything is real. When it's not.
Yes.
Not even close. It's like you're talking about DNA, it's like in CSI in 5 minutes, like, poof, there it is. Or how come you couldn't get a fingerprint off that blade of grass? I've seen it on TV, darn it. That kind of stuff.
It's mad. And people do actually believe that. That's like, I used to think it was pretty cool myself, the way they used to be able to get all the results.
Yes.
And get the person convicted and everything within 60 minutes. It was great. Come here, after all the cases you've worked on, and I'm sure there's an awful lot of them, and the stories you've written and the people you've helped, very obviously helped. What's the one lesson or message you hope people take away from your work?
Cops are asked to do an impossible job under the most dire of circumstances. They make decisions in under a second that will impact them and others forever. They're humans.
Absolutely, they are humans. Yeah. And they can make mistakes too. Right. So, Patrick, look, that's where we leave it. Unless you have anything else you want to add, you haven't any funny stories you want to tell us about, or anything funny that might have happened to you that you'd want to share with the listeners before we go?
Oh, let me take a peek here. There's a lot of stories. After 25 years on the street, they just come flooding through. And, I'm just trying to think of something. Probably one of the oddest, strangest stories. We talked about it one time. I don't know if that's okay to talk about here. But
go on, try. I'll put a warning at the beginning of the podcast.
Okay, sounds good. So I was working with another sergeant, and we hear a call come over the radio for a dead body in a warehouse that they had like old cars, limousines, dump trucks, and it was a dirt floor with no electricity. It was just a big old shed, but it was huge. And it was in the middle of the city. And I didn't even know it existed. I drove by it a million times, but I just didn't know I was in there. So
didn't take any notice.
Right. So it's like, okay, that's the address. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's start heading that way. So one of my cops gets me on a side channel on the radio. And it's like, hey, Sarge, you come to this? I'm like, yeah, I have to come to that. It's like, you're not going to believe what you're going to see. And I'm like, all right,
What?
fair enough. So I get there. There's a bunch of yellow tape out in front. And there's a woman that's probably in her late 60s and like an adult son with her. And she's bawling and he's trying to keep it together. And I'm like, okay, this is part of the equation. So we go inside and my two cops that are there, it's like, come on, Sarge, let's go. And I'm like, so me and my partner go. And there's a van with double doors in the back. And now there's no electricity and it's getting dark. It's like dusk. And they got their flashlights out and they're like, are you ready? Are you ready? I'm like, enough of this already stuff. It was like, just open the doors. So they open the doors and there's a guy that's on all fours. Rigor mortis had set in. His pants and his underwear were pulled down to his ankles. And there was a bottle of Jolly Good soda, a plastic bottle, shoved up his butt.
His derriere.
Yes, his derriere. And we both look at each other and I'm like, yep, haven't seen that before. But there was strings on the bottle and a paper bag, like a parachute. It looked like a parachute. And I'm like, oh my God.
What?
And I'm thinking to myself, this guy has been dead for a while. He didn't start smelling. Rigor mortis had set in. With rigor mortis, there's like, it's about 12 hours, maybe a bit more, where you're stiff. And then the body starts to loosen up.
And then it relaxes again.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
within that 12-hour period.
Yeah. And, weather.
It's fortunate for him.
Yes. Temperature and all that other kind of stuff, you will, subtract or add to that. So at any scene like this, the medical examiner is going to show up. And they have investigators. There's one medical examiner that has probably a team of about 10 different investigators that go out to these scenes. So the investigator that came that day, her name is Jen, and I absolutely loved her. She was the best one they had, and she was always smoking a cigarette. She's like, what do you got, Pat? And I'm just, hey, Sarge, what's going on here? And I'm like, well, this is what we got, Jen. She said, yep, you don't see that every day. I'm like, no, you sure don't, Jen. Yeah, it was like, all right. So, I'm walking out, homicide detectives show up, and it turns out this guy hired a prostitute and paid her to shove this bottle up his derriere. Yes.
His derriere.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So we don't know if he had a heart attack or if he overdosed because he had track marks on his arm. So he was doing heroin as well.
Okay.
And this guy is like in his late 60s. He just decided to start shooting up heroin. He was missing for like a week. So this poor woman, I'm talking to his wife, and she's like, I want to see him. She said, I want to see him. I'm like, no, you don't. This is not going to be your last memory of your husband. I'm sorry. I looked at the adult son. He discovered his father. And he saw it. And I said, you know what? We will be in contact with you. There's going to be a detective that's going to talk to you. I said, you don't need this right now. So thank goodness she listened. I'm like, okay, good enough. So fast forward maybe a week later, I'm at a different homicide. And Jen is the investigator from the ME's office. And, again, this area, what do you got, Sarge? And I was like, this guy was shot 4 or 5 times, blah, blah, blah. And she's just like, hey, you remember that guy with the bottle shoved up his ass? And I'm like, yes, I do, Jen. How can I forget that? And she said, oh, they did. Yes. She said, yeah, they did the autopsy and they don't remove anything until the autopsy. She said, the pathologist who did the autopsy took that out and they looked up there and they retrieved another bottle of Tabasco.
And
hot sauce.
Oh my
with the cover undone. There was no cover on it. So they used the bottle of Jolly Good soda to push the bottle of Tabasco.
Oh my God! What did they think was going to happen?
I don't know.
He must have perforated.
Yeah. And
sorry.
And the plastic bag, the parachute thing was in case it got stuck, he could pull it out. That was
Oh,
the
like the
escape.
cave, the people that go into the caves,
Yeah.
cave diving, that put the rope down that they can
Yeah.
follow it back. Oh my God.
I was like, oh no. All right, that's a new twist, and then
Oh,
and the
what
final
you had to
part
put up with, Patrick?
the final part of that story was years later, I'm retired. I was about a year retired. It was 2021, and I was working for Delta Airlines. I was loading and unloading planes. And there
Very
was
good.
a
Yeah.
retired firefighter that was there. And we're just talking. He was in Milwaukee as well. And he said, somebody asked him, hey, tell us a good story. And he started talking about this. I said, you were there? He says, yeah, I was there. I'm like, oh my God, I was in charge of that scene. He's like, yes, I remember you. And I'm just like, oh my God, all
Oh
those years
God,
later.
small world.
Exactly.
And of all the cases, like for the two of you to be on
Yes,
together. Oh
I
my God.
know. Tell you
Yeah,
what,
that would definitely sit with me too now, in fairness, Patrick.
I'll leave you with a heartwarming story. Okay, it's
Please
fast.
do.
Okay, so I was in charge when I was working at night. I was in charge. We had a tavern car. So what that was is when citizens were complaining about a pub they thought criminality was going on there. We would investigate it. We'd go in undercover, we'd act as patrons, or, like say there's a pub in a very bad neighborhood. What would happen is, I would go in and I'd close them down, after we would surveil them and all that kind of stuff. So we had an
You were the
underage.
buzz killer.
Yes, I was. So yeah, when people were getting killed, I was definitely the buzz killer. So what happened was we had this underage bar. I don't know how they even got a license, where if you were 21 or older, you wore like an orange wristband, and they let kids in there that were 18 to 20 to mingle with these adults. Well,
You see, to us now, that wouldn't be an issue because to get into a pub here, it's 18.
Yeah, well, it's a huge issue in where I am at. And you can't mix that. Of course, the 18-year-olds are drinking and getting drunk and whatever. And then they go outside and they start acting crazy. They're destroying property. They're doing all kinds of stupid stuff. So I was building a case against this pub, and I was down the road with another police officer. I was a sergeant. I brought one of my cops with me, and this is the day of the camcorders. We had a camcorder going, and I'm videotaping what's going on. We're recording. A picture is worth 1,000 words. It's like, okay, this is what's going on. You don't have to take my word for it. Just take a look.
Just look.
Yeah. So we're doing that, and there's a gas station right next to us. And we're in a Jeep Wrangler or something like that. It was an undercover car. There's no stickers. There's no lights. You would never know two cops are in there. And we're wearing plain clothes, and we have handheld radios. And there's this girl that pulls up to the gas station, and it was a cold Wisconsin night, lots of snow, and she jumps out and she left her engine running. She just went in to get a pack of cigarettes. And of course, one of these kids,
the young fella stole the car.
Exactly. But she hung on to the side mirror, and she was dragged all around the parking lot into the street. And this rodent took off with her car. Now, to give it context, this girl was probably 20, 21 years old. She was working two jobs, waiting tables. She was a server, and she was going to college. And this car was like her biggest worldly possession. And she said, this is what I need to go to work so I can afford to go to school. And what happened was, we see this happen. So I take off after the guy in her car. And I chased for like 6-7 blocks. And finally, he wound up on somebody's front lawn into a snowbank. He didn't know how to drive. And we ran after him and we got him. And she actually walked back, and she saw what was going on. Yes. And she's all skinned up and marked up, and I'm like, you could have been killed. I said, next time it's not worth it. But she started crying, and she was hugging both of us. She said, you have no idea what this car means to me. And now I have it. Because for us, most of the time we're responding to crimes after they happened. Once in a while you get lucky and you catch somebody in the act. But when you can do something like that and it directly impacts somebody's life like that, there's no better.
And you saw it firsthand, and you saw the impact that what your actions had for her.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. See, it's an amazing, I mean, I think especially in America, I mean, it's nearly as dangerous here now as well, but America just seems to be, I'd say, anybody that has a cop in their family over there, no more than here, worries about them every time they'll close that door every day and go out to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Patrick, I have to say, I really enjoyed that. It was very interesting, and I'll have to have you back some other time. You have to tell us more from the great out there in America.
I've got lots of stories, so yeah, I would love to come back. Are you kidding me? Of course I would.
Oh my God, yeah, no, absolutely. Because I know a lot of the lads that listen to me, the guys and the girls, they'd love hearing all your kind of stories. So yeah, and listen, thank you so much for all the insight, into both the badge and the page about your book. And guys, if you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to check out Patrick's Cops and Writers podcast and his fantastic books. So packed with real life experiences and tips for crime writers and true crime lovers alike. And what's your latest book called again, Patrick?
The Good Collar.
And where can it be got?
I'm Amazon exclusive right now, so Amazon.
So guys, head over to Amazon and pick up one of Patrick's books. You won't be disappointed. A bit of nighttime reading for you all. So I'll leave the links anyway to his website and his podcast below in the description. So until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So, guys, that's it for today's episode of the Arling Crimes and Mysteries podcast. Again, thanks for your listenership. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and hit that auto download so you never miss an episode. Until the next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. This podcast has been compiled from information gathered in the public sphere, like news articles, documentaries, and open source material that can be found on the web. Everything in this podcast is alleged unless a conviction has taken place.